to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. On today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Ranji Nagaswami, Chief Strategy and Chief Commercial Officer at SVP Global, an $11 billion distressed hedge fund and private equity manager. The topic today is leading with values in finance and why the imperative to find value-based leaders in the finance industry is so vital for a strong society. A 35-plus year leader in the asset management industry, Ranji's career has been at some of the most admired firms in the investment business: UBS Asset Management, AllianceBernstein, Hurdle Callaghan, and now at SVP Global. Ranji is in that small pool of women portfolio managers investing client capital and is one of the very few women who during her career held the position of Chief Investment Officer and a Chief Executive Officer. Ranji's success is in building investment teams, generating wealth for clients, and building successful investment firms that put clients above everything else. And that is our topic, leading with values in finance. Ranji, I've followed your career for many years, and I'm delighted you are joining me here today.
Thank you, Janice. A real pleasure to be here.
Ranji, let's start at the beginning and those formative years where you were raised in the western part of India, and your early passion as a dancer in a traditional Indian art style really took hold of you. Tell us about those experiences then, and then coming to the U.S. for your MBA at the Yale School of Management.
Janice, I grew up in the dusty suburbs of middle-class India, and hard to believe perhaps now, but I was a shy and wonky kid with a geek's passion for my studies and, as you noted, my passion for performing. Being a dancer growing up in India in the 60s, 70s, was rather like being a collegiate level athlete in the Western world today. I was so focused on my performance and being ready to dance and practice the next day that, one forgoes many aspects of a normal childhood. And for me, it was just practice, practice, practice. I spent my summer vacations studying the entire curriculum on my own for the following year with my sister's old textbooks so that I could dance rather than go to school. So tells you a lot about, the focus. And as I look back, the discipline from that time that set me up for a lifetime of being able to work really hard, and the commitment when you are so focused on peak performance to being excellent at anything I attempted. The first inflection point in my life for me was a debilitating injury during a 2-hour solo recital that pretty much ended my dancing performance career. And having grown up in a family of business people, where my extraordinary parents, my dad led a global business unit for an Indian conglomerate, and my mother, who was so ahead of her times, was an entrepreneur in the advertising and public relations business on a national stage. Given the two of them, my instinct was to go abroad and study philosophy and economics. Now think back to the India of the 1970s and 80s, and it was very unusual for a 20-year-old woman to leave home and go abroad. And my father only agreed if I did something useful. So no master's in philosophy for me, only an MBA would do. And that is how I came to the US to go to the Yale School of Management. Actually, one of the best decisions I could have ever made in my life. Small fun fact, Janice, to this date, I believe I hold the title of being the youngest ever to be admitted and to start at SOM. I was 20 when I joined, and my entire class came together to celebrate my 21st birthday. So rather precocious, but looking back, I regret nothing.
Well, you were one of the few to be that young there and to come to the United States, but obviously your family had a major influence on you, and you were not going to fail. You were going to succeed. So here you come to the States, and you entered the investment industry right after business school, right? And you spent years at the Yale School of Management Advisory Board, as well as the legendary Yale Investment Committee. And there you married your powerhouse partner, wonderful Yale professor and Yale SOM classmate Bo Hopkins. But Ranji, you had very few role models back then. And so what were those early years like for you in the investment business?
I think I fell back on my own abilities and very, very special group of friends. And look, my classmates coached me even in my first year at Yale. And SOM is a very special place in my heart and in Bo and our lives, all four godparents of our children who are still so present and they are in our lives, our classmates. And the school really protected me and took care of me. And I learned so much from that. Growing up in India, the one thing I will say about being in the US and in the SOM environment was learning how to ask for help. And once I did, I recognized that, in fact, the universe is conspiring to help you. And I have never forgotten that lesson from Yale. So in many ways, my peers were my role models. But as in all things, there are mentors in life who see something in someone and make a bet. I got into my career in asset management by talking my way as a first-year MBA student at 20 into a program that I discovered was being held for Yale seniors by a Yale alum to get them interested in finance at the then Chase Manhattan Bank. And I used, my dean, my career development office, everybody to get me into that program, which, launched my accidental career in asset management, where, of course, I have now thrived and never wanted to do anything else for the last 35 years. The early years was just sheer grit, throwing myself into new things, taking risks, raising my hands for complex assignments that no one else wanted, using what were then my superpowers, quantitative and communication skills, to be, better prepared than most of the senior people so that I became the go-to in a meeting for what were the hard facts on a topic. And 10 years after I started, first as a spring intern, then as a summer intern, and then as a full-time student at 22, I became the head of the very group that hired me and ran U.S. fixed income for UBS Asset Management. So it was fast, it was intense, and honestly, I think the ability to work within a meritocracy has benefited me throughout my career, because it was almost never about what I looked like or how young I was for a while. That was a long time ago, I assure you.
You're still young, Ranji. You'll always be young.
Thank you. I accept. And of course, since then, Janice, a number of extraordinary leaders, mentors have gone on to help me and guide me in my career, of course.
And Ranji, one of those mentors or person you worked for was Mayor Michael Bloomberg and his administration in the city of New York. You were the mayor's first ever chief investment officer when you chaired the city of New York's pension retirement system post the great financial crisis, a time of extreme stress for the city's finances as pension costs really soared and asset values plummeted. Now, you took on a major challenge here. Now, Mayor Mike was a great person to work for, but you had major challenges. How did you address these?
Those were two fascinating years. I committed a year to the mayor because I had verbally accepted a leadership position at a major asset management firm. He talked me out of that position and into coming to work for him. And of course, I stayed for 2 years. You're exactly right, Janice. When I got to the Bloomberg administration in 2010, everyone was tense and at loggerheads post the great financial crisis. The administration, unions, the comptroller, where the CIO sat, all were laser focused on the pension fund. Why? Pension costs had soared from 1.5% to the New York City budget when Mayor Bloomberg took office for the first time to 8% of the budget in 2010. And my analysis within the first, 6-8 weeks of my joining showed that it would be 12% if we didn't do something about it. We had to change what we were doing. Most importantly, we assumed the system, like all public pension funds, has an actuarial rate of return, an assumed rate of return that has no basis in economic theory because it does not presume any volatility. It assumes you earn that return year after year after year. And that return in 2010 was 8%. And my office's research showed that the reality was closer to 6%. But in order for us to move from 8 to 6 required a massive increase. That's why the 8 going to 12% of the city's annual budget being directed to a pension contribution. And so this, requiring the already high contribution for pensions to increase was really scaring everybody. And I was probably, if they took a vote, the least popular person in City Hall and with the unions for the first part of my job there. But the truth is that everyone would have to give a bit. And that is indeed what happened. I went around for the first year with a 100-page deck, and I had the 1-page version, the 10-page version, and the 100-page version. And depending on the patients, one of the 59 trustees had, and this is an extraordinarily complex system with 6 different pension funds. You think of them, fire, police, teachers, employees, board of ed, so on and so forth. And I spent hours, sometimes at a bar, sometimes in a taxi, sometimes, and most often in a conference room, with each trustee, with each consultant, with the comptroller, with the mayor's office, with multiple people within the administration. Because we needed to restructure. We needed to restructure the risk-taking in the portfolio. We needed to restructure the benefits. We needed to restructure the city's budget because they would need to find how to fund this, which meant fewer services for taxpayers. So the complexity of it, many were involved. My role was really on the investment side. I'm really proud of the work everybody did. Restructuring the asset allocation, reducing the assumed return, renegotiating benefits. And the good news in this is thanks to Mike's extremely strong moral compass, he never wavered from funding the commitment. Many public governments stopped funding, the state of New Jersey as an example. Mike never did. He always said this was a social contract and we honor our contracts. So that front row seat on Mayor Bloomberg's team was invaluable, by the way, also to watch Mike as a leader, as you implied. He was navigating the extraordinary economic pressures. It was a time of tremendous racial tensions, union resistance. It takes a lot to manage the world's greatest city.
Well, you were clearly leading with values there because I know a little bit about this and it's so complex what you did. So you're influencing skills, but always staying true to that moral compass, which is what you've also done with your project at the Aspen Institute. And you are a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. Would you tell us a little bit about what you've done there and the project that you launched and why it's so important today?
So in 2005, I became a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. Aspen's founding philosophy, one that thrives 70 years later through its fellowship programs, is to drive change through dialogue. This is a Socratic dialogue based on timeless readings that, go back to, yes, to Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but also to Plato and Aristotle, to really think about leadership values and how successful business people will use a values-based system to help solve the greatest challenges of our time. For me, this was an invitation to hit the pause button. I had been successful. I was CIO of AllianceBernstein's retail mutual fund division. But this fellowship caused me to reflect deeply on my leadership, my values, and perhaps most importantly, on my personal responsibility for using my professional success to impact society at large. The fellowship for me served as a transformative wake-up call. So in 2016, after years of working closely with the Aspen Institute and a few like-minded global finance industry leaders, we launched the Aspen Finance Leaders Fellowship Program. So what does Finance Leaders Fellowship do? And why did I really spend years working with others to found it? My belief, really from my time in government with Mayor Bloomberg's administration, was that what we needed in finance was to develop values-based leaders to consider the values and perspectives needed to use finance to build the good society. This really comes down to such a fundamental belief I have in the power of finance as a force for good. The finance industry's centrality to human progress has grown. Financial systems have deepened, global connectedness has increased. And yet we have also witnessed, Janice, the business practices of the finance industry having the potential to devastate society during the global financial crisis and in other episodes since then. So clearly we need to restore trust. And this restoring of trust can happen via regulation and vastly stepped up monitoring of the finance industry's practices. Or my belief, the real deficit is an insufficient number of values-driven leaders in the finance industry who want to use their power, position, tools, and treasure to grow the industry's profits, yes, but in a manner consistent with and supportive of the good society. So Finance Fellows today has 82 fellows from 20 countries. We are the most global fellowship at Aspen. We launch a class every year, so there are now 4 classes. We took a break due to COVID last year, but we'll launch a 5th class this year. And I couldn't be more proud of the fellows, my 82 fellows who are leading exceptionally difficult, complex organizations, and really, I hope these will be the role models and the leaders of the industry in the future to use finance's power to help human progress.
And Ranji, I've looked at that list of outstanding executives and what they're doing worldwide. So thank you for giving that overview. And now a quick reminder to our audience. You are listening to Leading with Values in Finance. Ranji Nagaswami, Chief Strategy and Chief Commercial Officer at SVP Global. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the 3rd Thursday of every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. Now let's return to Ranji Nagaswami. Ranji, you've spoken about the extraordinary cultural societal context of our times and the real imperative for leaders to act on those values, to truly be driven by a strong moral compass, and to make finance a power for good. But how do you balance the drive for profits balanced with one's moral compass and one's values?
That's a great question, Janice. I am an unabashed free market capitalist at heart. I absolutely see the central purpose of business as driving human progress through job creation, income generation, right? That comes from having more jobs, creating wealth, and reducing risks, right? Reallocating risks to those who can take it from those who don't want to take it and will pay the risk takers. I so admire the innovation and creativity, particularly in a society like the US, that inspires entrepreneurs to do highly risky things that could cause them a lot of grief in life. And I'm all for the profits that act as the incentive for these very special people to do those risky things. And it is not a but, it is an and. Businesses operate in a societal context. Businesses have a societal license to operate, and how they operate matters to society. Think of it as an implicit social contract. We, as in the larger we, society, protects a business through patents, legislation, and courts. And businesses provide us products and services we need and pay, and we expect business to pay labor fairly to produce those goods and services. And we've seen way too many times that businesses that veer off the path of creating value in society inevitably lag, get disrupted, or go bankrupt. I also, having run many of these businesses, and by the way, there's few things I love more than building a business. Business people have to do very difficult things. So we don't get disrupted, because making profits takes continual reinvestment, innovation, and there's lots of cyclicality. You can go up and down for reasons you don't control. Business leaders have to make tough decisions all the time. Sometimes it is to lay people off, shut down plants, stop offering a service that people care about. And this is where values come in for me. You see, I think it matters as leaders what we decide. What we decide can affect employees, vendors, communities, society. But equally, it matters how we decide. And that very quickly becomes about what a leader values in their decision making, who they listen to in making that decision. You know, we talk a lot, for just to give you one example, about giving feedback to employees, and companies sort their employees into the top 30%, middle 60%, and bottom 10% of performers. And as I was talking to a very important CEO who said, if someone is an underperformer in my division, I automatically terminate them because there is no room for bottom performers. I was on a panel questioning this leader, and I said, so implicit in that automatic termination then, Mr. CEO, is a belief that this person has nothing of value to contribute, that it is your judgment as a leader that, in fact, if you're at the bottom, you don't belong. Is that because you believe inherently that humans cannot be trained? Humans have no value if they don't do the one thing they were hired to do. What if instead you believed that they might have value? That that you might even put them on notice that they're underperforming, but you try to see if they're a better fit in a different job. You get them new skills so that you don't have yet another unemployment statistic, but a real human engagement and the chance for someone to course correct. I'm using this as an example, right? I don't know how many people there are that automatically terminate the bottom 10%, but it's out there. As a values-based leader, you would think a little bit about the premise, or you'd probably think a lot about the premise of how you make these decisions. Values-based leaders really examine the decisions they make, their leadership style. We really must understand the core assumptions we are making when we set policies about human nature, about the role of business in society. And there's a huge difference in approach and outcomes when that happens. My lens is finance, and of course, within finance, asset management. And finance and asset management place shareholders at the apex of everything. In investing, our LPs, those representing the savers of society, right, whose hard-earned savings we are investing, trump. Because when an LP gets fed up, they fire an asset manager if we're not making money for them. But LPs also exist in the context of society in our times. And let me assure you, LPs are wielding that power to have important conversations with GPs like SVP that are about many more things in addition to how we make money for them. They care that we keep making money for them, but they care about our policies around the environment, social practices, governance, ESG. They care about sustainability. They care about us building a diverse and inclusive firm. So I think there is a societal conversation that is going on around the world, and the Europeans in some way got to this, particularly around matters of the environment, 5-10 years before we did here in the US. But all of these societal needs and this societal context requires leaders to think deeply about what they believe and how they want to use business as a force in society.
So we're looking today at a world that has gone through major pandemic, an economic downturn, a political election that was fraught with so many bad situations that we can't even recount them. And, the social injustice that has gone on in this country with many different groups of people. Is it really important today more than ever before that we have these leaders in finance and other sectors that are really led by values? And what are you seeing that gives you concern and what gives you hope out there in terms of what you see with leaders today, Ranji?
Janice, I really believe that leaders need to step up boldly to seize this moment, not just in finance, but in all businesses, as an opportunity to strengthen human progress. We need bold solutions to address the challenges that we face. The COVID shock is stark evidence that crises of any kind require strong leaders to formulate holistic solutions. We must balance health, social, and financial demands. We have to move beyond climate risk management toward much closer alignment with climate outcomes. We have to create opportunities for innovation and investment in climate resilient infrastructure. So to be blunt, I think businesses have to look for new business and financial models to accurately assess and formulate strategies to reduce costs of climate change. Despite the ever-growing business case for diversity, inclusion in finance is underwhelming. There was a survey done of the largest asset managers. Black employees account for a mere 6% of the workforce compared to 13% in the US population. 7% are Hispanic compared to 19%, and only 24% are female. We, of course, women are half the population. So there are always problems, but I think the problems in society that we face right now requires a generation of leaders who see it as their purpose to use their platforms through the investments that they make, through their own firms to drive change in society. When we look at the arc of our lifetimes, we can go back a lot longer than that, but in the last 50 plus years, Janice, who do we think of when we think of the world's leaders who have led through these times, shaped society in the pace of progress? For me, people like Martin Luther King, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Lee Kuan Yew, I can go on, right? And scores who have not been in the limelight like those I have just named. We may not agree with them or their methods, but we must agree that these are individuals who stepped up and accepted responsibility to make a difference that shapes the narrative and course of human progress. And that's why I created the Finance Leaders Fellowship all those years by myself, and then joined by an extraordinary co-founder and many others at the Aspen Institute. And that's why I spend my time really getting successful business leaders at SVP and through my Aspen work to think about how do we as a business commit to finding new business models to do both, to make profits, because that is job number one. Making money for clients at SVP is job number one. I'm thrilled to be at a firm that has actually generated so much in excess returns for clients as they have done relative to benchmarks, relative to peers. So I'm very proud of that. And that is job number one. But we also have a moral imperative, as we have discussed repeatedly at the firm, to use our business, to use our control of operating businesses to drive the needed change that I have just talked about across ESG, across our own firm.
Ranji, you are a force of nature and you're powerful in everything you're doing. What parting words do you have for our audience in terms of what they can do to have an impact in making our society stronger and using their power and their influence on their platforms to really drive for good?
Many proposals will surely be needed. to improve the odds that business, but in particular my industry, the finance industry, remains a force for good. I personally place the greatest hope for the future of finance in particular in nurturing values-driven leaders who are unwaveringly driven, unwaveringly committed to direct the industry's business practices, the industry's culture, and its products and talent to serve society and shareholders. To me, this is an and. We need to make finance work for everyone in society. We need to make business work for everyone in society. Without that strong leadership, restoring that connection may prove elusive. It will be hard if we don't have values-driven leaders to imagine a finance industry of the future that will avoid the problems of the past. So in my mind, if there's one thing I had to leave you with, it would be that anything that is important and worth doing is never easy and does not come quickly. A proposal, a framework, a values-based framework that has its core a set of leaders who see themselves driving our institutions with a long time horizon is actually what is needed. So I am optimistic. I'm a true believer that we learn and we grow. But for me, leaders who commit to a deep personal transformation that begins with awareness, a transformative awareness of leaders thinking through who they are and how they can use their power and position for good in their businesses and in society, where I place the highest hope.
Ranji Nagaswami, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your extraordinary experiences in leading with values in finance. You really have made an impact and continue to make an impact on finance as a force for good. And thank you for introducing me to Aspen's Finance Leaders Fellowship. I've met so many great people through the program. You are really promoting better leaders for tomorrow who can use their power, their influence, and their platform for a better society. And thank you to our audience for tuning into another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined, released on the third Thursday of each month. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elligroup.com. Thank you for joining us today. And Ranji, thank you for giving us so many pearls of wisdom and actions that we all should take.
Thank you, Janice.